So here goes. Mark chapter 8, verses 1 through 10. In those days, when there was again a great crowd without anything to eat, Jesus called his disciples and said to them, I have compassion for the crowd, because they've been with me now for 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them away hungry to their homes, they will faint on the way. And some of them have come from a great distance. His disciples replied, How can one feed these people with bread here in the desert? He asked them, How many loaves do you have? They said, 7. Then Jesus ordered the crowd to sit on the ground, and he took the 7 loaves, and after giving thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute, and they distributed them to the crowd. They had also a few small fish, and after blessing them, Jesus ordered that these too should be distributed. They ate and were filled, and they took up the broken pieces left over, 7 baskets full. Now there were about 4,000 people. Jesus sent them away. And immediately he got into the boat, and with his disciples he went to the district of Dalmanutha. The gospel of our Lord. Praise be to Christ. Let us pray. Almighty and gracious God, help us to open our hearts so that we can hear the word and live it out. Amen. Experiencing a technical difficulty. That's over. All right, here we go. Kathy and I walked for a month in Florence. Winding cobblestone streets, magnificent churches, glorious food, and art everywhere. Florence is the city of the Renaissance. The Da Vinci, Michelangelo, Donatello, Raphael, Giotto, Vasari, Ghiberti, and of course, Botticelli. You can read this in a book, but to live there for a month, you can, if you're lucky, you can feel and see what it means for art to come to life. We were lucky. Again, this is the city of the Renaissance. The Byzantine style that came to a close in the 14th century was stilted and stiff, symbol instead of reality. People had fingers way too long and eyes way too big. No emotion, no real life. Art was more cartoon than embodied. And then, as if God breathed life as in the beginning, art came alive. Agony was agonizing. Beauty and purity were full of splendor. It wasn't just symmetry, it was harmony. The colors, like voices, all came together. 2 works of Donatello speak this the most clearly for me. In the church of Santa Croce, there's a crucifix carved from wood. On the crucifix, Jesus is dying. You see his ribs and tight sinews of his legs and the pain written upon his face. Ghiberti criticized the piece. He said, Donatello has crucified a peasant, not a god. But that's what makes it so powerful. God become human and poor and outcast and unwashed and unwanted. That's the Jesus we meet in the Gospels. Donatello carved the Gospels in wood, and the wood became alive and dwelt among us. The other work I couldn't stop looking at was his Mary Magdalene, or Magdalena. In Christian art, Magdalena is the image of female beauty. She is to the church what the Venus de Milo is to ancient art. The moment of beauty captured. The Magdalena of Donatello is about 70, 75 years old, maybe. Her body is skeletal, her skin leathery and worn. Her hair is straggly, matted, and messy. Shallow cheeks and hollowed eyes. She looks hungry. Her outstretched arm is begging. By calling her Magdalena, Donatello says, this is the one who anointed Jesus at Bethany. In her memory, the gospel will be preached. She is the beloved of the Marys, the one of gossip and scandal. Here is beauty, he said. Find grandeur in her. Shakespeare said something similar about his love. Her eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. I love to hear her speak, yet well I know that music hath far more pleasing sound. I grant I never saw a goddess go. She walks and treads on the ground. And yet by heaven, I think my love is rare as any she belied with false compare. The Magdalena of Donatello has a unique invitation in the Duomo Museum. There's a copy of it for the blind. You're invited to touch the statue, to feel her tattered robe, to feel the knobby knuckles and wrists unadorned by ring or bracelet. You may touch her. It's as if the curators truly understood what the statue was meant to provide. Here was beauty of the soul in a broken body. Here was a peasant who is the inspiration of every true sermon. Here is love begging at the door of your heart. I think my love as rare as she belied with false compare. If you walk Florence for a month and you're lucky, you meet Jesus at Santa Croce and see the crucifixion come alive. You meet beauty and love begging you to draw near. And then there's great food too. Fabulous cheese and wine and the bread and the anchovies and so much more. Outside of our apartment each day, there was an open-air farmer's market with fresh fruit and vegetables and flowers. In the morning, I walked through the beautiful stands to receive a cornetto from two lovely young ladies in a cafe. I would eat this pastry until I reached the boulangerie, and there was offered another cornetto by another lovely young woman. I did this each day. Buongiorno, grazie, ciao, ciao. Simple words with smiles. They would spy me coming each morning and hand me this delicate pastry through the crowded counters. On the western coast of Italy, there's a series of 5 small villages dotting the coast with colorful houses. The villages are called Cinque Terre, 5 lands. For a lovely weekend, we wandered through these cliffside communities. We were surrounded by throngs of people from all around the world, but it was as if we were in a bubble of beauty. We listened to the crashing of the waves and enjoyed the sunset that fell behind the cliffs which rise above the fishing boats at anchor in the bay. We were far from home, but at ease. At the end of our month, after having been joined by our youngest 2, we We stood in front of the door on the street, shoulders weighed by bags, hands clutching suitcases. We were about to walk away when the young woman from the boulangerie I saw each day caught my eye. She was out delivering bread to the restaurants for their evening meals. She put her hand up and waved goodbye with a sad smile. Thus my walking for a month in Florence ended. Our reading today is the end of a journey, of a long walk. It could have been a month. It was certainly no less than a few weeks. A month sounds right. Jesus took off. He left Galilee. He went north to the coast and east to the 10 cities of the Decapolis. The legend is that here he opened the door of the church to the Gentiles. Our reading today is the end of this journey, where the strangers are invited to dine, where the rabble are given compassion, where the unclean are treated with dignity. The beginning of the journey was the feeding of the 5,000. This was a meal for the Jews. This was a meal Jesus was prompted to provide by the disciples. They make no prompting this time. We can imagine that the disciples are very nervous right now. Walking through the Gentile villages, healing their sick and possessed is one thing. Bringing them home and inviting them to dinner is another. In the past few weeks, we've seen the wheels come off of Jesus' ministry. They're coming off a bit. He was venturing into chaos. He could not teach anymore as the crowd swamped him. He could not eat anymore as too many begged to be healed. He cast aside the kosher laws and said it's not what goes into the mouth that defiles it, it's what comes out of the heart. He's chastised by the Syrophoenician woman, and his commands just simply go unheeded. He says, "Tell no one," and they tell everyone. But nothing really compares to the feeding of the 4,000. To help one or two, to heal people in a village, fine. To say, eat what you want without fear, daring in that day. But still nothing compared to the invitation and meal he offered to the Gentiles. This was the moment where Jesus laid aside all barriers, all exclusion. The feeding of the 4,000 is the heart of Jesus wide open. Paul would describe this when he said, in Jesus Christ, there is no male or female, Jew or Gentile, no slave or free. Paul said this because of the divisions, the exclusions that came about to the Eucharist. The table of the Lord was meant to be without barrier. A beautiful idea. Impossible to live. The feeding of the 4,000 must always be seen as an ending. True, it was the opening of the doors to the Gentiles, but the feeding of the 4,000 must be seen as a process, a path, a mountain to climb. It's misunderstood as a simple step forward. If you remember the antitheticals, Jesus listed in the Sermon on the Mount, you recall a similar path. Remember, don't be angry, don't lust, don't discard people, don't have false confidence, don't be vengeful, and then love your enemies. Remember, you can't start with the last one. Unfortunately, love your enemies is the one of the six that we remember the most. Again, you can't start the path of discipleship by loving your enemies. You must first put aside anger and wrong desire. You must find the patience to keep people with you, and then you must find the humility, the power of meekness, so to turn the other cheek, offer the coat with the cloak. And only then, and with a profound gift of grace, can you love your enemy. Such is the path from the feeding of the 5,000 to the feeding of the 4. You must first find compassion for those who are with you. Love your neighbor before you love the stranger. You must rise above the chaos of desire and find the true danger of darkness. Then you may offer compassion to the outcast, speak the truth, give what is good to the broken, care for the unwanted. I could have seen the art of Florence in a brief visit. I could have toured the Uffizi and the Academy and walked the nave and chancel of Mary Nuova and Santa Croce. I could have seen them, but it took time to live them. The journey from the head to the heart takes time. Donatello's Magdalena is repulsive and hideous upon first sight. She causes you to squint and wince, but then she will catch your gaze, and if you linger, beauty may appear. The hard crust of our fears and demands and desires is broken open. A fissure appears. Leonard Cohen said there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. The meal, the feeding of the 4,000 is the turning point in Mark's gospel. Two more key moments are coming, the declaration of Peter and the transfiguration. Yet both of these can be seen and heard, believed without much cost, without much demand upon the heart. The feeding of the 4,000 makes an incredible demand. You must live with your heart wide open. This is frightening, and again, it's not the first step of discipleship, yet it is the first step of spiritual freedom. There are types of freedom, economic freedom, political freedom, intellectual freedom. Spiritual freedom is what Jesus lives in the feeding of the 4,000. He has compassion for all. He feeds them all. He welcomes the outcast, the unwanted, the unwashed. This is a bold step, a frightening leap. This is not a matter of understanding. It's when love has come to break the last chains of fear in us, when the shape of our soul comes alive. Where before we were cartoons without splendor and beauty, and then we came alive. We were reborn. A renaissance. Only the beauty is not from without, but from within. We gain the eyes of Shakespeare, who has the rare love. With such eyes, we find the king become peasant, the dead resurrected. If we follow Jesus, this is our journey. We begin by loving the neighbor, and we end by loving all. It begins when we put aside anger. It ends when we can love our enemy. This is the path of becoming altogether new. I highly commend a month in Florence. It's truly wonderful to walk the streets and live immersed in such beauty and, of course, the food, lovely. If you do go for such a time, you stand a good chance of seeing art come to life. Yet I also commend that you would follow Jesus from the feeding of the 5 to the feeding of the 4. Not quite as artsy, perhaps, but an even greater promise. For if you do, you may just see your soul come to life. You may find the power of love where you live with your heart wide open. Amen.